Let's begin with the simple question that often shakes the foundation of religious belief. If everything must have a creator, then who created God? This question might sound childish at first, but it holds deep philosophical weight. It reveals a contradiction in many religious explanations of the universe. Religious people often argue that the universe must have a creator because everything must come from something. But if everything needs a creator, then God too must need a creator. If God doesn't need one, then the argument that everything must have a creator falls apart. You can't apply a rule to the universe, but exempt your preferred being from it without special pleading. This is one of the most basic and powerful arguments against the logic of theistic belief systems. Let's dig deeper. Religions typically say that God is eternal, that he exists outside of time and space, and therefore needs no creator. But this is a clever way of dodging the initial problem. It replaces one mystery, the origin of the universe, with an even bigger mystery, the origin of an eternal, all-powerful, conscious being. As Osho Rajneesh once pointed out, God is the greatest fiction man has created to comfort himself in his ignorance. Osho understood that humans, when confronted with the vast unknown, feel fear and insecurity. To cope, they invent a powerful protector, but in doing so, they create even more unanswerable questions. Who created this protector? Where did God come from? And if God doesn't need a creator, why does the universe? Philosopher Bertrand Russell said something similar. He argued that if God can be exempted from having a cause, then so can the universe. It's a simpler idea, and in philosophy, simplicity matters. The simpler explanation, the one that introduces fewer assumptions, is often more rational. This is known as Occam's razor. Let's take a short story to understand this logically. Imagine a child asking his father, "Dad, who made the house?" The father replies, "The builder." The child then asks, "Who made the builder?" The father says, "Well, his parents." Then the child asks, "Who made them?" And the chain continues. Eventually, the father says, "God made everything." Then the child, being curious, asks, "Then who made God?" At this point, the father has no answer except, "God was always there." But this breaks the pattern. Why can't the universe also have always been there? Why is it logical to assume that God is timeless, but the universe must have a beginning? This inconsistency reveals a major problem in religious logic. And it's not just a technical issue, it's a problem of belief systems built on convenience and fear, not on reason and evidence. Now, let's bring in Yuval Noah Harari, author of *Sapiens*. Harari explains how humans created gods, myths, and religions as part of their social evolution. In his view, religion is a shared fiction, a story that people agree to believe, because it binds communities together. Gods were invented to explain the unknown, to control people, and to give a sense of meaning to suffering. But just because something gives comfort doesn't mean it's true. Harari says humans are storytelling animals. Religion is one of our oldest stories. It helped tribes form shared identities, wage wars, create laws. But these stories are not based on evidence or logic. They're built on imagination and authority. Let's take examples from archaeology and history. The ancient Greeks believed in Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. They thought these gods controlled the weather, the sea, and the underworld. Temples were built, rituals performed. People truly believed in them. But today, no one believes Zeus is real. What changed? Human understanding evolved. We discovered science. We learned about weather patterns, tectonic plates, disease, and biology. The need for gods diminished. Similarly, ancient Egyptians believed that the pharaohs were divine, sons of the gods. They mummified bodies for the afterlife, built pyramids aligned with stars. But now, we understand these were cultural practices rooted in myth, not truth. So why do people still believe in a god today? Because modern religions are more sophisticated. They've learned to survive change. They adapted with philosophy, apologetics, and new interpretations. But the core problem remains. There is no verifiable evidence for any god. Let's talk about evolution and nature. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection explains the diversity of life. without needing a creator. We now know that complex organisms evolved over millions of years from simpler forms. DNA mutations, environmental pressures, and time created the astonishing variety of life we see. Let's talk about evolution and nature. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection explains the diversity of life without needing a creator. We now know that complex organisms evolved over millions of years from simpler forms. DNA mutations, environmental pressures, and time created the astonishing variety of life we see. We don't need a god to explain giraffes, whales, humans, or bacteria. Nature did it slowly, blindly, and beautifully. Animals live, reproduce, and die without religion. They don't pray. They don't build temples. They don't fear hell or seek heaven. Yet they thrive in ecosystems. They cooperate, compete, care for their young, and feel pain. Morality and intelligence are not unique to religious humans. In fact, studies show that primates like chimpanzees display empathy, grief, and fairness. So religion isn't required for life, ethics, or intelligence. Now, let's explore the defenses made by religious believers to the question, who created God? One common reply is, God is outside time, so he doesn't need a cause. This is problematic. First, we have no experience or evidence of anything outside time. It's a concept with no grounding in reality. Second, if something can exist outside time and have no cause, then why not the universe itself? Why invent a supernatural being? Another common defense is, God is the necessary being, everything else is contingent. This is an argument from classical theology, especially by thinkers like Thomas Aquinas. But again, it assumes what it needs to prove. It defines God as necessary, then concludes God must exist because a necessary being must exist. That's circular logic. The Kalam cosmological argument is another popular defense. It says, 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause, and that cause is God. But this argument is flawed. First, it assumes that the universe began to exist in the way everyday objects do. But the beginning of the universe may not follow normal rules. Quantum physics shows that particles can appear and disappear in a vacuum without a clear cause. Causality itself may break down at the quantum level. Second, even if the universe had a cause, why must it be a god? Why not a natural mechanism? Why not a multiverse? Why assume it's a conscious being who cares about human morality? Let's talk about logical fallacies. Many religious arguments commit the special pleading fallacy. They apply rules to everything except their God. If everything needs a cause, so does God. If God doesn't, then the rule doesn't apply to everything. There's also the argument from ignorance. This fallacy says, we don't know how the universe began, so it must be God. But not knowing something doesn't prove anything. It just means we don't know yet. Science is comfortable with uncertainty. Religion is not. There's also the argument from ignorance. This fallacy says, we don't know how the universe began, so it must be God. But not knowing something doesn't prove anything. It just means we don't know yet. Science is comfortable with uncertainty. Religion is not. Now consider atheistic arguments. Atheists don't claim to have all the answers, but they reject unjustified answers. They say, if you claim something extraordinary like a God who made everything, then you need extraordinary evidence. So far, there is none. Richard Dawkins, in The God Delusion, argues that a God capable of designing a complex universe must be even more complex. So God explains nothing, he only adds more mystery. It's like saying a watch was made by an even more complicated watch. Let's return to Yuval Noah Harari. He writes that belief in gods helped early humans cooperate in large numbers. Shared myths created trust. But now, we live in a different age. Science, technology, and human rights don't need myths. We need evidence, reason, and compassion. Osho Rajneesh said that belief is the enemy of truth. Truth needs inquiry, doubt, and freedom from dogma. Religion demands faith belief without evidence. That's dangerous. It leads to intolerance, violence, and stagnation. Now, short story again. A philosopher and a priest are walking together. The priest says, God made everything. The philosopher says, then who made God? The priest says, no one made God. He just is. The philosopher smiles and says, then let me say, the universe just is. The priest is silent. This story shows the double standard. If it's okay to say, God always existed, then it's okay to say the universe always existed, or that it came from something natural. Religion often wins arguments not with reason, but with emotion, tradition, and fear. It teaches people that questioning is sinful, that doubt is dangerous. But doubt is the beginning of wisdom. As Carl Sagan once said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Until someone can provide such evidence for a God, especially one who created everything, but was never created, then belief in God remains unjustified. In conclusion, the question, who created God, is not a childish trick, it's a deep challenge to religious reasoning. If everything needs a creator, then so does God. If God doesn't, then not everything needs a creator. Either way, the logic collapses. Religions are ancient stories trying to explain a world that science now understands better. From evolution to the Big Bang, from DNA to black holes, we have natural explanations for the things we once needed gods to explain. And when we don't yet know something, it's okay to say, we don't know. That's honest. That's humble. That's human. Thank you for listening.